The Vanny Warp Skip in Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach is here, and I discovered something quite bizarre after messing around with it. Now, this is something that possibly, if used correctly, could really aid speedrunners in completing this game fast. Now, I say that without knowing what this game really contains in full scope. I haven't gotten too far into it, but what I discovered, hypothetically, allows player to bypass about an hour and 15 minutes of gameplay. Now, whether or not this is helpful, or can even be achieved under normal circumstances is up for debate. However, knowing how diligent players are, I'm sure someone's going to find a way. So let's talk about this. FNAF Security Breach is probably the biggest and most ambitious Five Nights at Freddy's title to date, but given the scale of this game, and the fact that it was produced by quite a small team means that there are going to be bugs and glitches, and possibly unintended side effects of not testing certain situations. I mean, when playing the first time, I accidentally ran to the recharge station before Glamrock Freddy told me he was going to run into it, and, well, he trapped me in there, just staring through my soul. Eventually, I starved to death under his cold gaze, but I digress. This Vanny Warp I'm referring to is actually at the start of the game, but it's possible that it might be able to be triggered in other areas as well. When the game first starts, we see Freddy in the mirror checking himself out, but it isn't too long until we realize that Gregory, the player, is within his robotic torso. Gregory climbed in when Freddy went offline, and thus our protagonist is now trapped in this room with this giant friendly bear. But it isn't long until we see our antagonist working night shift. Vanessa, a figure we're sort of familiar with from Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted, appears outside the window. Gregory, obviously, does not want her to find him, but as soon as she appears, she essentially vanishes, and I mean quite literally. She appears in front of the player, and she just unloads off camera. But it's this scripted event that actually allows us to warp through the game. You see, if Gregory were to clip out of this room by locating some piece of faulty geometry or misaligned collider, then in a hypothetical situation, a speedrunner or glitch enthusiast may be able to exit this room and get access to the outside space before it's intended. Now you may be thinking, oh cool, let's just grab the photo pass and get to Freddy. But the sweet spot is actually Vanessa's walk cycle. And what's great about this is that this Vanessa is actually a prefab game asset. Now that's Unity talk, and quite honestly, I don't know what the comparable is for Unreal Engine since I've never worked in it before, but having made Zardy's Maze in Unity, when creating our horror antagonists, prefab assets were created that essentially are a packaged, reusable configuration for an object. So Pumpkin Jack's model, collider, parameters, and associated scripting were bundled into one asset that could be called upon and used as often as needed. But that also meant that if I drag and dropped Pumpkin Jack into the maze, that upon touching him, he'd kill me. Same for if we did this with Zardy, the main antagonist Scarecrow in the game. They always had this logic in place. And this is important, because Vanessa does too. Even though this Vanessa we see simply walks across the map and unloads, it's still the same bundled object configuration that a free-roaming Vanessa has. So that means when we touch her, we're going to get jump scared. However, we have to remember that the first time we get jump scared, or rather grabbed by Vanessa, that the game throws us into the room where Vanny comes after us. Think of this as step 1 in the game's logic. The first encounter with Vanessa will always warp the player here. After that, things can change as progress is made, and Vanessa's logic gets updated. But because this first encounter is normally scripted to occur in the elevator, and the player has no control, this is the only place under typical circumstances that this event can take place. That is, unless the player glitches through the wall in the main room, triggers Vanessa's jump scare grab animation, and then gets warped into the future much farther along in the game. A potential speedrun skip that takes us from mere seconds after the game starts to about an hour later for an average player. Could this help speedrunners? Possibly. Will this get patched? Also possibly? Well, if you want more game-breaking content in Security Breach, subscribe now because I have a lot more coming. Cheers!